Think your tree survey is a tick box exercise. Think again. Tree officer objections are one of the top 3 reasons for planning delays across the UK, and most are avoidable. Today on Ask the Arb, we'll walk through how not to trigger a refusal from your tree officer and what they're really looking for when they're reviewing your plans. Let's go. Hi folks, welcome back to Ask the Arb podcast, where in this episode I'm going to talk to you about tree surveys. I've recently recorded a video on tree surveys. We'll link it, if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll link it down in the description, and go and check that out. Brings things to life a little bit more. But for those of you who are listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, etc., first off, thank you very much. I realise this is a very boring, very dry subject, and that you've probably only found us because you've got a problem that you need help with. So that's our mission here, is just to try and add value and to try and help you navigate the murky waters of the planning system in the UK. So today we're going to talk about how not to trigger a refusal or an objection from the tree officer at the local planning authority. So first off, who is the tree officer? Well, the tree officer is somebody who's directly employed by the local planning authority. There may be 2 or 3 of them, depending on the size of the local planning authority. And their job essentially is multifaceted. And one element of that is to ensure that the local authority's tree resources are adequately protected through development, by making sure that development proposals don't harm or damage or destroy higher quality trees. So how do they go about that? Well, they will ask for a BS 5837 2012 compliant tree survey to support the planning application. And that standard, it's going to change soon. I believe it's next year, 2026, the new standard is coming out. We're not expecting huge changes across the board, but there will be changes nonetheless. And why should you care? Well, you should care because if you don't get the tree survey done early, and at Rover we say trees first, not last, and the reason for that is we get so many people coming to us who have they've sat down with the architect, they've got emotionally involved in the process, they've drawn up these dream plans, they've submitted the plans to the local planning authority, and then it turns out that the root protection area, which is an imaginary 3D area where the tree roots extend out around the property, that they could potentially conflict with your foundations, and therefore your development proposals could lead to adverse effects on that tree. So the tree officer objects to your planning application. They ask for further information, and it could sink your entire scheme. It could lead to an expensive redrawing of the plans. And you know, at the end of the day, this doesn't mean that you can't remove a tree. It just means that you've got to have clear justifications for every removal, and that you've got solid plans for which trees you're going to retain and which trees you are going to remove. Trees that you do remove, they quite often look for 2-to-1 replacement on those. I get asked about tree preservation orders all the time. Is a tree preservation order mean that I can't remove the tree? Not necessarily, because the tree officer will not know what the condition and quality of that protected tree is until they see your report. So if there is a fantastically beautiful oak or copper beech next to your property and your development is going to affect the roots on that, and you say, do you know what, I'm going to apply to have this tree removed, it's unlikely that that is going to proceed, but your arboricultural consultant can advise on that. If you've got a protected tree that is mutually exclusive, maybe it forms part of an edge feature on your development, maybe that tree is not particularly high quality, then it could be that that tree could be removed to facilitate development. Something else could be replanted in its place. So TPO doesn't mean an instant no, neither does conservation area. You've just got to wait and see what is going on with that one. So before we go any further, it is time for You've Got the Questions, the planning system's a nightmare. We have got the answers. Welcome to the Planning Permission Panic Line. Yes, folks, planning permission panic line. So what I am doing here is I am frantically scrolling through my huge list of questions that I've got here to find one that is tree related, and I have found one. So we've got one here. John from Basingstoke has replied to one of my weekly emails, and John basically says the council was asked for a BS 5837 tree report. What even is that, and who writes it? Well, very topical. We're covering that in this episode, John. So hopefully that is helpful to you. A BS 5837, that just means the British Standard. British Standard 5837 for tree surveys. It started back in my ARB consultants are going to be shouting at me. 2010? Was that the first one? I think that was 2010. I could be totally wrong with that. Anyway, the latest update was 2012, and there's a new update coming now, and it just talks about how trees should be surveyed, protected, and enhanced through the development process. Who writes it has to be an arboricultural consultant. They have to have a background in arboricultural consultancy, preferably a member of the Arboricultural Association or similar, have relevant qualifications, at least a foundation degree in arboricultural science, and preferably signed off by somebody a little bit more senior. Who you can't get to do it. You can't get your architect to do it. They might know enough to draw it all up and measure it on a plan, but it's unlikely to get accepted because, particularly with B&G now, the trees have to be assessed from a quality perspective. So your architect can't do it. Your landscape gardener can't do it. Your tree surgeon can't do it unless they've got the right qualified people within their tree surgery business. You need an arboricultural consultancy. So hopefully that is helpful. What else have we got here from a tree perspective? We've got Ahmed in Ilford wants to know, our neighbour says we can't touch the trees near the boundary. What does the tree survey actually clarify legally? So there's two parts to that, Ahmed. Essentially, that coffee's cold. That's not good. So common law basically says that if you have got that you as the landowner are legally allowed to trim the trees back to the boundary line as long as you offer the resulting waste back to your neighbour. In practice in the UK, if you go hacking trees back to the boundary line and offer the neighbours back the waste, then there's going to be likely conflict. But that is the legal position. Is it called tort law? I can't remember. The second thing to consider is that depending on the tree, if it's a hedgerow, if it's like a Leylandii hedgerow or something like that, then trimming it back to the boundary, it might brown it off, it might look horrendous for you moving forward, so it's better to have a dialogue with your neighbour. The other thing to think about is that if it's quite a mature tree, you could destabilise the tree and do some real damage to it moving forwards if you have everything hacked back to the boundary line. So a bit like the BT advert from the 1990s, it's good to talk, and that is what you need to do really. You need to have a dialogue with your neighbour. If that is not possible, yes, you're legally entitled to cut back to the boundary line. That actually includes roots as well, which seems like a terrible idea. Before you go down that road, make sure the tree's not protected and it's not in a conservation area, because you could be facing fines if you do that. So back to the episode. Where are we? When you need a BS 5837 tree survey, the spoiler there is almost always, if there are trees on or adjacent to the red line boundary of your site, even if the tree's in the neighbour's garden, you're almost certainly going to need a tree survey, because those roots could be extending towards where you're proposing to build, and you could damage your neighbour's tree. What does the tree survey need to show? Well, one of the key things within it is a plan. And that plan needs to show the RPAs, which are the root protection areas. That's the key thing. And they also need to show the above ground constraints. So that's how far the branch work extends. And that's normally shown in 2D as a circle as the extent of the crown of the tree. And then you have another circle which shows the extent of the root mass of the tree. And that can be offset by various different things. So if you've got a tree right on the boundary line, and between the boundary line and your property is grass, but between the boundary line line and your neighbour's property is, I don't know, 2 foot of concrete, then it's likely that all of the tree mass is going to be offset into your property. So you really need an arboricultural consultant to help you with this process. And then there'll also be a covering report with something called arboricultural data tables. I've done a video on that and walked you through them, and also the covering report as well, which does a bit of a deep dive into the history of the site, what's going on in the local area. It's called a desktop study. And, what will trigger a tree officer once this report gets to the tree officer? What are the sort of red flags that will trigger a deeper investigation? Sort of vague tree removal justifications, no arboricultural method statement which plans what's coming next during development. It talks about how the trees will be protected through development. Incorrect RPA calculations. So again, I spoke in a previous episode about fudging ecology reports for BNG. That can also happen with trees as well. Your arboricultural consultant should include photos within the report to help justify what they're talking about and reference those correctly. Aerial imagery really helps with that. Drone-based imagery really helps with that. So before we wrap this one up, I have got one more feature for you, and that is... Hi folks, it's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning related facts. Let's go. Yes, let's go. It's time for You Couldn't Plan It, which this week I've got an absolute corker for you. So you'll have heard me talk about my weekly email list. Why do I do a weekly email list? I'll be quite honest with you. I have a real interest in digital marketing, automation and all that kind of stuff. And I know that as a business, if we keep in contact with our customers and keep in their zeitgeist, their mind, they're more likely to come back and buy from us in the future. So we communicate with them on a weekly basis. Is it a newsletter that says Bob in accounts is really pleased with his new certificate, or that Sarah's dog isn't very well, blah blah blah? No, it's not. It's about adding real value. There's usually an anecdote or two in there, but if it's something that you would like to receive, then reach out to us, and we can pop you on the list. So this is my weekly email from the 28th of July, and I'm going to read it to you verbatim. So the subject is, don't bring sweets to a 3-course meal. And I say, hi there. Every now and then a planning application pops up that hits harder than most, not because it's right, but because it's so well written you can't help but respect it. This one showed up on my LinkedIn feed this week, and it's a chef's kiss. It's like watching a 6-year-old sweet stash get publicly incinerated. And here it is in full. So here's the planning objection. My initial objections still stand, and I would strongly ask for these to be revisited and considered when making a decision on this application. I'm now going to express exactly how I see this development and the weak approach taken by the designers to try and make token changes. Last night, my daughter came home from school with a bag of sweets that her friend had given her for her birthday. The bag was full of amazingly coloured treats, all different sizes and shapes. Some made my mouth water just looking at them. On the side of the bag, it had all these crazy ingredients that I'd never heard of. Mostly they were just a jumble of letters and numbers. I gently explained to my young daughter that her dinner would be ready in 10 minutes, and that if she was to eat a bag of sweets, it would undoubtedly ruin her appetite. Being 6 years old, she tried to negotiate. My daughter removed all of the green sweets and just left the other 6 colours in the bag of sweets. How about now, Dad? Can I have one of these, please? My daughter missed the point, and so has the designer developer here. All you've done is remove a couple of sweets from a bag of sugary rubbish. How about you bring some classy chocolates to the table, or maybe some fruit or anything else that will complement the area? I find it truly insulting as a homeowner in this beautiful area of our city that someone thinks they can come in and try to scar it forever. I also despise the disregard shown to our planning team, that you feel that you can present such amateur arguments and expect them to be told to tuck into all your sweets at such a cost to the rest of us who have spent some years preparing the main meal. Shame on you, and shame on your desire for money with no regard to the local people. I then go on to say, absolutely scathing, but also totally avoidable. Well, maybe. If you're putting forward a scheme with missing tree surveys, weak ecology inputs or token biodiversity gestures, this kind of response will happen. We see it all the time. One half-baked arboricultural report and suddenly a planning officer's quoting it in their reasons for refusal. Or worse, a resident who used to work in procurement writes this and sets the tone for the whole committee. The point is simple. You can't remove a few green sweets and expect no one to notice. Good design isn't just visual, it's technical too, and it needs bulletproof evidence to sit behind it. So if you're thinking we might not need a full ecology survey here or a tree survey, ask yourself if you're inviting someone to dinner or serving them Skittles on a bin lid. Bring the classy chocolates, get the right surveys done, and give the planners and locals nothing to poke a stick on. And then I signed that one off. So I thought that one was worth reading verbatim. It's rare that you see a planning objection of that quality written in that way, but they are out there. They live among us. So back to the main podcast here. What do we need to know as we wrap up with tree surveys? Well, quite often we find ourselves rescuing refused applications after the first consultant, their tree report's not up to scratch. Perhaps the architect submitted something and it wasn't to the required standard, or maybe they used a tree surgeon or something like that. And just make sure you're using a proper arboricultural consultant. Remember, trees first, not last. And ask your consultant, is this report going to pass scrutiny? Have you worked with this local planning authority before? Ultimately, make sure you get your tree constraints plan done before the architect does the layouts, and just make sure you are well prepared so that you don't get those objections. So that's it, folks. That's it for this episode. I hope that has been useful. A little bit of background information on tree surveys. If you want to find out a little bit more about tree surveys and what's required from a planning perspective, I've got a book called The Planning Application Hack. There's two versions, one for architects and one for homeowners and everybody else. It goes into, it's not a technical book, goes into plain English about some of the things that I've spoken about today. So you can grab yourself a copy on Amazon. I think it's free on Kindle. And I think there's a PDF version on our website that you can get for free as well. So hopefully that's been helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.